Cross-border payments provider Verto says it has welcomed the news that the U.S. House of Representatives has voted to extend the African Growth and Opportunity Act. While the move signals a positive step toward maintaining vital trade between links between the U.S. and Africa, they warn that the ongoing lack of a finalized timeline and specific clarity for South Africa continues to pose risks to regional currency stability and SME growth. We are joined by James Booth from Verto, who's the head of revenue, for a discussion. James, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, you as Verto, as well as the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition and many other sectors, have welcomed this decision. Tell us more as to why.
Yes, thank you for having me on the show tonight. So I think in essence, the extension of AGOA is ultimately very good news for sub-Saharan Africa as a whole. It allows exporters to now obviously gain tariff-free access to US markets. So goods from Africa will now be really competitive locally. However, for South Africa, it's still very uncertain. The vote has, obviously the bill's passed through the House of Representatives. It still needs to go through the Senate, and then ultimately the White House has to sign off and then decide on a lot of the finer details that are included in AGOA, including the eligible countries. And obviously considering South Africa's, let's say, current state with the White House, it's I wouldn't say cause for concern, but I think we need to have cautious optimism at this point in time.
Yeah, I literally stole the words right out of my mouth, because I was about to say, so should we just call it a bit of cautious optimism? Because while this is a step in the right direction, judging off how our current state with South Africa and Washington stands right now, when that bill finally does get to the Oval Office and to the President for his signing, the chances of that approval may be slim.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's slim. I mean, at the end of the day, we're one of the largest economies in Africa. We're the third largest trader within the AGOA Act. And by not including South Africa in AGOA, it opens the door for us to trade more with other regions. Obviously, there's the African Continental Free Trade Act, where I believe we need to do more trade. There's the US-UK, where we can do a lot more trade. But then there's also America's adversaries. There's China, there's other parts of the world that if we're blocked from AGOA, it would just pivot us towards some of these other regions. So I think it's strategically important for the US to maintain positive trading relationships with Africa and particularly South Africa.
And James, you quoted us saying that regardless of this final outcome, which is what you're speaking of now, regardless of the final outcome, South Africa needs to have a post-AGOA mindset.
Correct. I mean, and I think that's true of every country that's included in AGOA. The extension's for only 3 years, which is great news, and I don't want to undermine that. But 3 years is not a long time in the grand scheme of things. And we're not guaranteed that AGOA will extend again in 2028. So I think in the interim, we either need to push for direct trade agreements or diversify and hedge our bets and ensure that we continue trading with the US, but we invest more in intra-Africa trade, invest more in European trade and other regions, because there is a world where AGOA will disappear, and we need to make sure that we're equipped for that.
And now, James, from a Verto point of view, from the business that you've done on the ground, have you noted any kind of a difference when it comes to investment and revenue since the relationship between South Africa and the US has become a little bit more tumultuous?
Yes, I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, we focus on facilitating a lot of the payments and trade for our end customers. So I can't speak for the investments that our customers are making on the ground, but we have seen a lot of them shift their trade and shift their flows into other regions. So we've seen flows from the US flow into Europe. we're also seeing a lot more intra-Africa trade as well, which I think is very positive for the continent. But to be honest, it is still very early to tell whether there will be a significant shift because of our inclusion or exclusion in AGOA.
As you mentioned as well, this extension would only be for 3 years, and we do need to think about a world post-AGOA at some point or the other. The Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Parkstyle, is advocating for a more long-term kind of renewal of AGOA. Do you think that this should be the avenue where we're sticking our or applying more of our pressure to try and rather get a more long-term AGOA, or to get it into the mind frame of it's not here forever?
Correct. I think we should be pushing for a long-term AGOA or an equivalent trade agreement, because I do think AGOA has brought positive impacts to Africa-US trade, and I think it's seeing benefits in a lot of sub-Saharan African countries. So I really do think we should push for a long-term deal. Because ultimately, I think as a continent, we need to make sure that we're trading as much as possible around the world, and that includes the US. They're one of the largest economies in the world. So we don't want to completely pivot away from the US.
James, really appreciate your insights this evening.